Thank you so much. I am so excited to be back here with y'all. And it's also so exciting to see how many of y'all brought your spouses here for me to change this weekend. Y'all, it's going to be really neat, to watch them grow. It's going to be a special time. So how many of y'all were here for my marriage conference, Finders Keepers, back in, right? And hopefully the rest of y'all have listened to it. And how many of y'all are visitors? Oh, wow, good. I'm a visitor too. Welcome. Okay. So we did the conference, what I call Finders Keepers, before, which is kind of my basic marriage conference. And this year, I'm getting to do something. I don't get to do this conference but maybe once a year. I really love doing it. It's kind of like, you go to a concert, and the Beatles are you're going to want them to play A Hard Day's Night, But probably what they want to do is play some of the stuff they've been playing, at home, their own stuff. This conference is kind of that for me. And in this analogy, I am the Beatles. Okay, but I originally wrote this conference, though, not for lay people. I originally wrote it speaking to ministers, pastors, church leaders, RUF leaders, whatever, because I wanted to get them kind of more down and gnarly in terms of how I actually think about marriages, like in my office. This conference is a little more technical. It's harder. It's one of the reasons I told you to go listen to the first conference before you came here, because you're going to be wondering why are there not 3 steps to conflict resolution? And I'm going to be pushing you harder than that. So this conference is a little more like, I'm going to teach you acrobatic flying, and you're going I don't know how to take a plane off. That's sort of why the other conference was important. So most every marriage conference you will go to, including the one that I did before, is going to give you kind of a simplified version. I want to give you some steps that you can take home and do today, and that's great. But this conference is a little more oriented toward capturing for people how a real therapist thinks about marriage. You're going to hear the way I talk to my clients in my office. So it's like, this is going to bargain, okay? I don't know how much they charge you for this, but this is free therapy, whatever, right? Now, that's good news and it's bad news, okay? The bad news is that I'm going to be pushing you. I'm going to be teaching you to think about marriage like I've learned to think about it after doing therapy for 40 years, all right? So that'll be challenging. As challenging to you as if one of you taught me, pediatrics or accounting. I'd be like, whoa, all right? But the good news is this is how I really think. I'm not soft pedaling you on this one. After helping messy marriages my entire career, actually I started doing my first marriage therapy sessions when I was still in seminary, and I wasn't married yet. So you can imagine the lives I changed, So why don't you just go submit to him? That's what the Bible says, like that. Anyway, yeah, so I'll push you, but it's going to be worth it. This is actually the number 1 downloaded conference on my podcast. And tomorrow, Dealing with Difficult People, the morning conference, is the number 1 by twice of any talk I have on my podcast. So instead of talking about the stuff that we usually talk about in run-of-the-mill marriage conferences, if you're tall enough to ride this ride, I'm going to try to take you downtown into some hard questions. We're going to talk about forgiveness. How do you make sense of that? We're going to talk about dealing with our spouse or your mom or your sassy teenager when people are being jerky and don't care. How do you respond to difficult people? We're going to talk tonight about making sense of our childhood baggage that we drag into our marriages. So, welcome to John's Marriage Conference on steroids, all right? But what's the saying? Faint heart ne'er won fair lady. So we're going to do it anyway, okay? So I'm going to tell you what we're going to do this weekend. Tonight we're going to talk about baggage. And you know what I mean by that. You know how you bring a ton of your own needs and fears and longings and stuff from childhood, and that's going to be in the background of your marriage all the time, right? If you don't know, I'm really glad you're here because you're doing it and don't know it, okay? So that's really important. One of the major reasons that people struggle in their marriages, and one of the things that I focus on the most when I do marriage work, is the garbage and junk and triggers and needs and unresolved things from my background that I bring into the marriage. And the more heads up you can be on that, trust me. So, how do we make sense of the baggage in our marriage, and how do we insulate our marriage from, and insulate our spouse from the fact that I'm probably just mad at my mom, or my dad didn't connect with me, so I need you to really hear my needs all the time. So you're doing the baggage thing whether you know it or not. Let's know it, okay? Secondly, tomorrow morning, last time we talked about conflict, but when we talked about it predicated on the belief, the fact that you both were on board, that you were having a disagreement and you're like, oh, honey, we're fighting again. Let's work this out, okay? In other words, biblically speaking, that you were both repentant, that you were both open to growth and change. This year, we're going to look at something that's a bit of a pet project of mine. And it actually became a pet project of mine because I run into it so much in my office that I had to figure out how I'm going to handle this. And it's an incredibly powerful tool, and I've never heard anybody else try to talk about it. And I want to write a book about it one day, but I use it in literally half of the marriage work I do. And that is this. What do you do with conflict if you're married to somebody, and this one will have application to not just your spouse especially, like your controlling mom, or your disappointed dad who's still trying to run your life, or your teenager. What do you do with conflict with an individual who doesn't care? In other words, they're going to be a jerk, and you say, whoa, and they're like, I'll talk to you any way I want. Or maybe, how do you just deal with a regular person who's having a difficult day and kind of taking it out on you? Bottom line, the question is, how do we make sense and how do we respond in a godly, Christ-like, life-giving way to difficult people? Conflict is fine if you have two repentant players, and we talked about that last conference. And even though it's not long division, we still screw it up, okay? But what do you do with an aggressive person, with a shamer, with a pouter? That whole dynamic. The people who say stuff like, well, you would think that. Or one of my clients who said, her husband said, well, there's some laundry here that needs doing if you're just sitting around, all right? Or worse than that, all of my friends' wives work out. I'm just saying, okay? If that's surprising to y'all, maybe it's just Mississippi people. I don't know. I deal with clients who are telling me about jerks they live with all the time. So I'm like, how do you respond to that? All right? So every family has an alpha running things in the background, somebody who they're tiptoeing around, or maybe just a regular person, maybe just your spouse and they're being crabby McGrumpy pants after work one day and taking it out on you. Either way, how do we engage conflict with people who don't really care? Vastly underdeveloped in the Christian community, if I might say so. So come tomorrow and watch the fun unfold, okay? So finally tomorrow we're going to unpack forgiveness. This is another something I really wanted to devote a lot of thinking to in my life. Another vastly underdeveloped topic within Christian circles, despite the fact that it's very central to our faith, okay? How do we forgive? What do you do when you can't let go of something? Are there times when we don't need to forgive? What's the deal between forgiveness versus reconciliation? What do you do if the perp doesn't care? Blah, 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 blah. I find forgiveness to be this incredibly nuanced, complex process. And most Christians in my office kind of orient themselves purely kind of from a position of well, you're supposed to forgive them, right? Let's try to broaden that a little, all right? So, that's going to be applicable to your romantic relationship and your life. I was talking to Jeff earlier, and he made an astute observation that this conference especially is a life conference almost as much as a marriage conference. The things we're talking about are going to have impact in terms of the way you deal with things at work or at church or with your kids or your parents or whatever. We're talking about the hard parts of emotional maturity in relationships, okay? Doesn't that sound like a blast? All right, so that's our weekend. If you want lightweight, run away, go down. I'll hide. I won't even see you leave. You can run. I won't know, okay? But if you want the real guts of marriage and relationships and kind of how I think about stuff in the trenches in the office, then we're sad. All we need is a deck of cards, man. So let's get going. So tonight we're going to talk about baggage. Welcome to Baggage Claim, okay? Let's begin by remembering our 2016 Finders Keepers Conference. You know, the one that you were commanded to listen to. I'm sure you all listened to that one. Anyway, as you recall, in that conference, we talked about how one of the marriage secrets of the universe was realizing that the real problem with marriage really isn't with your marriage. Instead, what I've learned from doing marriage work and being married for way too long, my wife and I just celebrated our 40th anniversary. Yeah. I told her, I said, you know, it's just like, it's better than it's ever been, but frankly, when I said till death do us part, I really wasn't thinking I was going to live this long, but 40 years is great, okay? But after doing marriage therapy for a really long time, one of the things that I really started to realize was that the real problem in marriages is not that you married the wrong person or your spouse is a jerk or whatever. The real problem in marriages and in a lot of life, and in your spirituality, by the way, is that marriage and life and relating to God and one another requires a lot of emotional, functional, relational abilities like software. And all of us are missing some of them, okay? Remember I used the analogy, I said that being a human being is a little like being a car. Like to be a successful car, you have to be able to do a lot of things. You got to be able to go, and you got to be able to turn, you got to be able to stop. And these capacities, these abilities that the car has kind of determine if the car works. So if you're a car with no brakes, fine, you're cool, as long as you're like barreling down the freeway of life, okay? But if there's a detour ahead or a traffic jam, you start pumping the brakes, nothing happens, and you run into that Kia Soul, okay? And you do that even though you didn't want to, by the way. You do that even though you've tried real hard. You do that even though you've prayed about it. And you still do it. Remember we talked about this? The good news in that is that one of the conclusions we made last time was, therefore, the problem in your marriage is not that your spouse is an evil person. It's that you're both missing these abilities. So your wife wants intimacy, right? She wants connection and for you to share your heart. But maybe you were never really taught what it means to really be intimate and share like what it feels like to be you. Like, ladies, you're at dinner with your husband and you say, honey, what are you thinking right now? And you're thinking he's going to say, I don't know, I was just thinking that, I've got everything I need right here with you. But if you're married to a guy, he's going to go, I was just thinking, that pigs are really big. I mean, like some of them, you could ride one of them, they're really, and that's kind of what we're looking at, right? When you say, I really want to know you. And he's like, well, I like watching Duke play basketball in my boxers. It's like, I love you too, honey, whatever. So anyway, we didn't have this ability to get connected. So we can do that with all of the abilities, which we'll talk about in a second. Maybe your spouse is real demanding, pushy, and you never learn the ability to say no. So they push, they want their way, but you don't really know how to push back, how to exist, how to say, this is who I am. So pretty soon you feel like you've disappeared in your marriage. Now that is one of the things we said last time was that's not a marriage problem, that's a you lacking the ability to be you and exist problem, remember? Or shame problems or emotional management problems. Bottom line was that marriage and relationships depend on these abilities, and what I wanted to do last time was kind of create a collection, a list of what those were so you could know what they are and have those categories. That's actually the same 4 categories that I used to write the parenting book, because what do we want to develop in our kids? Good boys and girls? No, I want them to develop the software that not only reflects God's image, but also makes life work. That's kind of the dandy part of being a therapist to adults, is you go, oh, this is what an adult that works looks like. So let's what is that word? Deconstruct it. Let's reverse engineer it. Let's reverse engineer a healthy adult. And that'd be a parenting book, okay? So anyway, the best news from all of that was that if you have marriage problems, since you have marriage problems, that's not because you're a horrible person or your spouse is, or you married the wrong person, or I knew I should have married that bass player or whatever. It's because you're all missing pieces, missing software. And no one is the bad guy. We're just missing software. And we can learn the software. Okay? So good news. All right? That was a lot of what we talked about then. And that was a lot of structure for 2016 in the marriage conference. All right? So what we call those abilities that I was just playing around with, I called them the 4 I's. Well, actually, the 5 I's. You know, the ability to be close and intimate, the ability to have identity and a sense of self, the ability to make sense of imperfection and loss, the ability to do emotional management and impulse control, ringing any bells. But the most important one, of course, whether we're talking about our faith or whether we're talking about our marriages or whether we're talking about our parenting, was the 5th I, and that is what I call inability because it starts with an I. God calls it repentance or humility, and that is the ability to say to the people who I'm close to, you know what, I can't do this stuff. Will you teach me? Will you help me? I'm broken. I'm fallen. Okay? And we said if you looked at this list, you probably saw 2 or 3 that you weren't so good at. And I said the advanced students probably saw like 8 you weren't so good at. Either way, you're normal, and the problem is not that you have a crummy marriage, it's that you're missing pieces. So here's our question for this year. We have these categories, we have these things we need to develop growing up, we have these software issues. What's going to happen when I bring my incomplete junk and baggage and it meets your incomplete junk and baggage? What happens when my childhood injuries or needs or longings or blind spots run into yours? Because that's in the background of all of our marriages. And I want to give you a category tonight for making sense of that together. All right? One of the biggest dynamics in marriage, one of the primary things that I talk to couples about, they can be coming in going like, well, we can't agree on like what school to pick. But underneath that, almost always, it is so helpful to start realizing, right, y'all can't agree on what school to send your children to, but one of the things we're learning is, dude, you were really shown growing up that making a mistake is the worst thing in the whole world. And wife, you were shown that unless you were supportive of everyone, never said no, that you were terrible and bad. So we put those 2 people trying to make a decision together. Whoa. Okay, they don't need somebody giving school counseling. They need somebody making sense of these missing pieces. That's like one of the number 1 things I teach couples, and I want you guys to understand it. Welcome to the party, all right? So let's start here. Why do we have all this incompleteness and baggage in the first place? Well, obviously, part of that answer is sin is in the background of that. And sin creates this distortion in everything. Sin is sort of that prism that bends light. Now, what I want us to do is say, yes, right. Now let's step behind the prism, and I want to look at all of what it does to the light. I want us to understand what sin does inside of us, because God made us to develop. God made us where we're born and we don't know very much. In fact, list me all the things that an infant can do, right? And as you can read in my best-selling landmark parenting book, Setting Parents Free, kids don't know very much. And in fact, anything they know, they have to learn. They have to learn forgiveness just like they have to learn tying their shoes or spelling, okay? We learn these things about love and identity and forgiveness and emotional management. And since this is a screwed up world, and I hate to be the one to break it to you, but we're all screwed up parents, okay? But don't feel guilty. You know the old saying, if you think mama's crazy, you should have met grandma. You know? All right. Since that is so, then we all end up growing up with blind spots and missing pieces and character software and glitches and longings, okay? And by the way, if you are sitting there now going, oh my gosh, what am I doing to my children? You are who I wrote a book called Setting Parents Free for. Notice the book is not called Raising Great Kids. It's called How to Give Your Kids What They Need and Where to Run Them When You Drop the Ball. Because I learned in my practice that the biggest issue for parents was they were terrified of messing up their kids. So let's put that aside, okay? And let's focus on you and your growth and your marriage tonight, which is really what your kids need anyway, okay? So anyway, we all have these blind spots and glitches and junk, and then we get married. And what's going to happen? Cue the suspenseful, dreadful sounding music. Well, those missing pieces are going to start showing up like the phantom menace in the background of your relationship. Like that thumb that has a cut on it that you bang against every doorpost whenever you walk through. You know how that happens? In other words, and this is one of the most important things you can ever learn in your marriage and our topic tonight, when we have these incomplete glitches and wounds and junk that we bring into our marriage, something in us will feel that missing piece. We'll feel that glitch or that hurt or that owie, and we will do one of two things. No, we will do two of two things. We will, number one, look to our spouse to finally meet that unfulfilled need. I've always wanted to be connected to, and that never happened in my family, so you're going to be the one to understand me. Or our spouse is going to step all over that need. And I'm going to be somebody, my injury is I need lots of affirmation, and she's going to be like, I don't think they painted that color's not right at all. And we're going to go, no! All right? They're going to trigger us. So this is kind of secret of the universe number one for us this weekend. And that is, we're going to bring that junk either to try to hope at some level that our spouse is going to meet that need, or we're going to watch them step all over it, and we're going to go reactive and, bananas. So, let's look at them. Number one, something in us is going to inexorably, inevitably long for our spouse to finally meet that need, fulfill that longing. Here's what a couple of my clients have said after kind of getting curious about this. One of them said, I finally realized after really getting honest with myself and like how I feel in my marriage, that I really wasn't looking for a romantic relationship. I was some level looking for a healing relationship. Another one said, I realized that I've always wanted that one hole in me filled by that one person, someone who would choose me. And a dude told me, he said, I just want somebody to be happy about me, to where it was like I was enough. I was good enough. Now imagine how he feels every time his wife said, oh, you forgot to take the garbage out. Boom, Now why? It's just the garbage, but not for him. We're bringing questions from under the surface, and I want you to be thinking about that. All right? So something underneath the surface is looking for some sort of an answer to this core question that we'll talk about in a minute. We're looking for somebody to finally give us a good answer to it. And actually, our culture tells us that's what marriage is supposed to do, right? Complete you? Hello, Jerry Maguire, right? Well, think about every Meg Ryan movie, okay? She's adorable and intelligent and cute, but she's alone, okay? Except for maybe a golden retriever or something. And all of her cynical single friends are like, give it up. There are no good guys out there. But she doesn't give up. And there's a guy, and he starts emailing her. Or he has a bookstore down the street. Or he's an angel. Or he's from another. They're all the same movie, right? Or he's a platonic boyfriend. But could that work, It's the same movie. And so by the end of the movie, she's adorable and she's intelligent with that great little haircut and the golden retriever, and she's in love. Okay, and that's every movie, right? And something in us is like, yeah. No wonder we're all disappointed, right? What is it my wife says? Men marry women hoping they'll never change, but they do. And women marry men hoping they will change, and we don't. Okay? That was either Norma or Einstein. I'm not sure, but, Norma, Einstein, Norma, whatever. It's kind of, I get them confused. So we think at some level, marriage is going to be this place where I'm finally going to get the freedom, the love, the connection, the belonging that I've always wanted. It's kind of like a do-over, right? Wrong. It doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. Well, maybe not in a second, but in a minute, all right? The other thing we do with our baggage is our spouse is going to trigger it. In other words, not only are they not going to meet that need, at last, they're going to step all over it, all right? So let's say your baggage is you need to feel like you're good enough, that you make people happy, that you're impressive and you please them, okay? And so your wife starts talking about her friend whose husband makes $1 zillion. And I can't believe it. They're going to Paris again this year. And they got a new place out on Amelia Island that's just supposed to be amazing. She's got a decorator from Garden Undone doing it, right? And something in you, and you can't quite put your finger on it, but something in you starts to feel this feeling. And it's kind of this insecurity, but that's not how you feel it. It turns really quick to kind of anger. And something in you is like, does she think he's better than me? Does she wish she was as rich as that? Does she not see how hard I work? And you see this feeling start to rise up in you of resentment because she's talking about this amazing guy and all the money he makes. And so you get quiet. And she goes, is anything wrong? And you go, no. And she goes, oh my gosh, are you feeling like threatened, like you don't make as much money as him? And you know how that conversation will go, right? Till 1:30 in the morning, okay? All because an event happened that was like a Harry Potter port key for you to insecure triggered land. All of a sudden you're like, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Well, this guy, I didn't make this guy up. This is a real guy. His dad literally used to say to him, you're never going to amount to anything. And he does that in his marriage. He always feels not good enough. Now, can we streamline some how they talk about the ways in which they might let each other down? Sure. But the most important thing for him is not to say, that rotten wife, nothing's ever good enough for her. But if he can move to the place where he can get curious about, you know what? I reacted to that, but my reaction to it was sort of like 2 + 2 = 10. So where did that extra 6 come from? If you can start asking that in your marriages, you're gold, baby. I'm going to be getting thank you notes from you guys by Christmas, all right? So basically, what he's doing is bringing that down the aisle with him. That's what I want you to get and to understand. When you have these chronic issues in your relationship, when you feel things trigger you excessively, then I want you to start getting curious about them and thinking, where's that stuff coming from? That's where we're going this weekend, all right? We're doing depth marriage work, and this is the real reason that marriage is hard. This is the real reason that this is a challenge, because you're not just dealing with you, you're dealing with both of you. Your own stuff, your junk, your pathology, your limitations, you're going to do them in your marriage. You know the old fortune cookie joke, in bed? You know, you will have fame and fortune in bed. Did y'all do that? Okay, right. Well, you will work out all of your psychopathology in your marriage, all right? And in bed too, but you know, that's a different show, okay? So we all come to our marriages with this junk and they expect our spouse is going to finally meet that need, I'm going to be good enough, or they're going to step all over it. And when we do that, it's going to be a dumpster fire and we're going to have conflict and think we married the wrong person and blah, 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 blah. And I find this to be one of the most, maybe the most important dynamic in marriage. It's not that we have poor communication skills, okay? I can communicate, I hate your guts very well, thank you very much, you know? It's that you have aliens living inside of you, all right? You have 5-year-old aliens living inside of you. Here's the epicenter of this, okay? I tell this to my clients all the time and draw this out like I'm going to draw it out to you. This is how I want you to begin thinking. Secret of the universe number 2. There are 4 people in every marriage. There's big you, and there's big her, and there's little you, and there's little her. And you guys actually get along pretty well, you know? I mean, you can have problems, you can work them out, and you can talk. But then one of you says, you know, that thing. And so he comes in and he says, meatloaf again? Now, big you might be able to hear that, but instead what happens is little you hears it. And it's like, oh. You want like cordon bleu here, you know? And little you then reacts and goes, well, I mean, if you're not happy with what I'm cooking, you're welcome to cook it yourself when you come home. You know, adult you might be able to hear that, but adult you doesn't hear that. Little you hears that. And you're like, oh my gosh. You think after how hard I've been working all day that I would have the emotional resources to come home and cook? You don't understand how hard I work. And, you know, there you go. Now, big you and big her could probably get along pretty well. But it's the little kids that are causing all the trouble. And I want you to recognize that, okay? Now, before I leave this, I got to tell a joke on myself because the first time I ever did this, I wasn't really thinking and I just drew it. And I drew circles. And all of a sudden I had a giant 8th grade boy joke. So these are squares, people. Do you understand me? These are squares. Am I clear? Okay. Another way of saying it is this. Marriages are like two people, both of whom have half-empty picnic baskets. Okay? In other words, you have some stuff in your picnic basket. I'm sure it's great. But we have something we're missing, we're longing. Maybe we feel lonely for a kind of connection or some sort of encouragement or building up or a sense of freedom, whatever. So my picnic basket has some stuff, but it's missing a lot, and man, am I hungry. Then I meet little Susie Q over there. And man, does she have a great-looking picnic basket, if you know what I mean, okay? And I'm sure it's all filled with cheeses and wine and fruit and maybe a checkered blanket, for our picnic. It's just going to be wonderful. She's going to be so full of affirmation and respect. And she actually is when you're dating, right? It's like, oh, you lace shoes for a living? That's fascinating, That's what it's like, right? And you're thinking, this is going to be great, and she's going to fill me right up, okay? I've got some needs, I can feel them. Now, the problem is she's thinking the same thing. Okay, she's got kind of about a half into picnic basket, and she meets you, and it's like, oh, he's mighty cute, and he's got a nice looking basket of goodies there, like maybe he cooks, And initially, she's going, he's going to really meet my needs. I can tell, like for nurture and attention, and like he's going to want to hear me when I talk about how I'm mad at my friend or that thing my mom said, and he's going to really get into that, And initially, when we're dating, we're like that, right, guys? We're nurturing and attentive. We write them poems. Written many poems lately, guys? Just asking. I don't know, And of course, that couple's going to get married, and what's going to happen? Well, after the ceremony, he's going to say, okay, we're married. Let the fulfillment begin. Start filling me up with all these things that I'm missing, these longings and wishes. Meet my needs, baby. And she's like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought you were supposed to meet my needs. And besides, I only have a half a picnic basket. If I fill up your picnic basket, mine's going to be empty. And he goes, well, the whole marriage was supposed to meet needs. And she goes, yeah, it is. So get busy, buddy. And you can get your own Prosecco, whatever. And they both come to the table longing and hoping and wishing, and they both leave needful and disappointed. And we have a phenomenon that we call in Mississippi, 2 ticks and no dog. All right? So here's the secret. Big you and big her get along really just fine. It's these little kids we got to worry about. So, one of the most powerful things you can do in your marriage, and the reason I'm doing this talk and this conference is because one of the most powerful things you can do in your marriage is let the fact that you have 2 5-year-old aliens living inside of you become a very conscious part of your marriage. That you have half picnic baskets become something that you're very conscious about. Okay? So, good news again. Your spouse is not the bad guy again. The bad guy is the vulnerability and the insecurity and the injuries and the questions and those things that we don't know what to do with, so we live them out on each other, and you're both victims of this enemy. I want you to look at one another. You're both victims of this enemy, so let's fight the enemy as friends, fellow strugglers. You are both, if you're repentant, okay, and we'll talk about unrepentant more tomorrow. If you're like someone who says, I want a better marriage, but I'm still a jerk. You have what I call now, I don't think this was in the conference back then, a Romans 7 marriage. Where Paul goes, the thing I wish I do not do, I do the very thing I hate. I want that to be something you say in your marriage. The thing I know you wish that I could give you, I cannot do. I hate that. I want to grow. Just that humility, that's the 5th eye, right? Just for y'all to have the category of, you know what? We both are victims of this little kid injury stuff, and we're bringing it to our relationship. Let's let that be the enemy. And let's be friends, and let's grow together. Together, you actually can fill up the picnic basket. Once you stop fighting over who's going to get fed, you can take cooking classes. Okay? Now, I'll just say this as a caveat. By the way, this isn't like that wacky psychobabble you hear about. Let's find out what your mom and daddy did and blame it on them. Hope you're not hearing that. We're talking about software. We're talking about what we learn and what we develop that does impact us. I want us to know what those pieces are because we all have them. So even our own parents aren't the bad guy. The fallen, broken world is the bad guy. We're all just broken. I just want to learn what to do with that so it stops making us act like marionettes with one another every time we're triggered, okay? So I want to build some categories for how to think about these missing pieces, some categories for what they are and how those deficits play out in your marriage. And let's do that by remembering our 4 eyes from last time. What's going on in those empty picnic baskets? What's going on for those 5-year-olds? I want you to have these categories again so it can help give you some sort of cubby holes to start thinking, I think this is really one of my issues that I dump on you, you know? Because the biggest trick is learn to catch it. And I'll tell you more about how to catch it, but I'll give you a preview, and that is you can always catch a little kid 5-year-old garbage thing by its intensity. Okay, the 2 + 2 = 10 thing that I was saying when I was standing over there, that's the tell, that it's out of proportion. I'll save that for later, all right? So I want you to catch the stuff, start to know the baggage, and start to engage that. I think Keller says something in his marriage book I really like. He said that marriage doesn't so much put you in conflict with your spouse as it puts you in conflict with yourself. That's what I want to do tonight, is put you in conflict with yourself, all right? So let's look at them. Intimacy. Remember, this one was about belonging and connection and sharing your heart and attachment and trust. We called it, can I let you in and can I keep you in? Can I share my heart with you below the surface? Can I trust and hold on to love? God made us, for some reason, He made us to where we have to receive a lot of emotional connection, especially when we're little, in order to thrive. If we don't, something in us kind of withers. We need to be mattered, we need to be close, we need to be understood. Y'all remember those studies that came out of the Second World War, kids who were in orphanages, babies, and some of them were dying at an inordinate rate, and they couldn't figure out why. And they realized it was because babies were in wings of orphanages where nobody was holding them. They were like giving them a bottle and that's it. And they were literally ceasing to thrive. It was called miasmus, from failure of human contact. So expand that to an adult, and you realize that a lot of what makes us heal and grow and whole is connection. God calls it abiding, not only with Him, but with one another. It's fundamental. It's human fuel, okay? So if we have missing pieces or injuries there, we're going to feel it. It's going to be an owie. We're going to feel a longing. And we're going to be longing for someone to fill that back up somewhere, not mentioning any names, okay? Another way to say that is we as children are born and continue to live asking what I call core questions of everybody in our lives, primarily the closest people. And we do that implicitly and explicitly, but children and us as children are always kind of wandering through our world kind of with these questions about relationships and love and connection and failure. And we're kind of trying to read the world and read the people in our lives to get a vibe for kind of how to answer those questions. Questions like, does it matter how I feel about stuff? Give me a vibe for how big a deal it is for me to fail. Can you give me kind of a sense of how much I should be concerned about that? Do you want just good boy me or you want real me? Our little eyes are watching for answers to those questions everywhere we go. All right, now, fortunately and unfortunately, we're getting answers to those questions everywhere in the relationships we have. Again, if the parental guilt is rising, we can do something about that, all right? But here's where we begin your marriage therapy. Basic principle of the galactic empire. If I don't get good answers to these core questions when I'm a kid, I will continue asking them of everybody in my life, everywhere I go, mostly my spouse. But I will ask them everywhere. I'll ask them at work. I wonder if they think I'm good enough. I'll ask them in Raleigh. Ooh, are they liking my conference? I'll ask them at church. Does she really like me? Okay. I'll ask them on a train. I will ask them in the rain. I will ask them in a box. I will ask them of John Cox. Okay. I will ask them everywhere until I'm trying to get a good answer. And sure as shooting, we're going to ask them in our marriage. And if you do that, you're in for a buggy whipping. All right. It's not going to work. And you can be like roofing the house. But something in you is thinking like, are you happy with me? You look mad. Or you're kind of disagreeing with every one of my ideas. What, do you think I'm dumb or something? Or you sound kind of critical. Do you love me even if I let you down? And we're having this in the background all the time, okay? And now you're not talking about the roof anymore. Somebody's going, well, what's that supposed to mean? And you know how it goes. Now there's your tell. Did you hear the intensity? That's your tell. That's how we're going to start spotting these areas. If you're trying to ask, all right, what's a kid need that I'm bringing in my marriage? And where is it just I'm a dude and I want to roof the house. Let's work this out, You can tell by the intensity. Once you feel that 2 + 2 = 10, once you feel sort of the anger rise up, somebody really screwed something up for me earlier in the week. It was a difficult experience. And I realized that I almost couldn't think straight. I was so angry. And I told my client, I said, I got to let you know that I am really kind of emotionally triggered right now. Like I'm really angry and I'm really a little dissociated. And if I do like a lousy session, it's on the house. So I don't have to worry about it because I'm not all here, okay? I could feel that I was agitated. I want you to start learning that sense of touch, taste, okay? Being aware of emotion is not touchy-feely. Being aware of emotion is like being aware of color. Are you emotionally colorblind? And if we are, let's grow there to where you can kind of go, whoa, I am so lost here. I'm going to take it out on this client and I need to warn them. Or what a wonderful thing to say to your spouse. I'm coming in exhausted. I say this a lot. Norman and I joke that I gave at the office has all new meaning for me. I'll come in and go, I got nothing. I'm brain dead. I need to eat supper. I need to be quiet for a minute before I can engage her. It's I want to give you a warning, all right? Here's an example. A guy I worked with a while back, a couple I worked with. His father left when he was really young, and it made his mom really depressed. And something in her just shut down. And so their family was this very lonely place. Dad was gone. Mom was sort of emotionally unavailable. And he hurt. So then he gets married. And guess what his wife is like? She's little Miss No Cry Babies bumper sticker. Okay? In other words, she always wants space. She wants freedom. She wants to avoid intimacy. Now let me ask you, think like a therapist here for a second. What starts to happen in him when she doesn't want closeness? Does he go, oh, well, that's kind of sad, but we'll work it out. Not a problem. I sometimes need a little space too. No, he just, he can feel that neediness and the anger escalate. He starts to panic. What's your problem? Do you not love me? And he goes into this intensity. And actually, the more he panics and the more he goes into intensity, look how much you're not loving me like I want. Guess what she does? She pulls away more, fulfills his worst dream, and they start a dance. Y'all remember dances from the first conference? I do A, which makes you do B, which makes me do A worse, which makes you do B worse, and we're off the races to the old folks' home. I used that term in Wisconsin last year, and they didn't know what I mean, the old folks' home. This is North Carolina, though. Y'all know the old folks' home, right? Y'all need 2 ticks and no dog, I tell you, right? I did a conference in New York, and I told the guy, I said, are they going to think I'm like a country bumpkin? And then he said, at first, yeah. But then they're going to say, this is good stuff, even though he talks funny, okay? I'm like, well, y'all are all dressed in black, so same to you, all right? So to help this couple here, of course, we needed to streamline some stuff about how they made sense of intimacy, but more so, we needed to make sense of the fact that what he was bringing was not just an adult need for intimacy, and what she was bringing was not just an adult fear of intimacy. We needed to look at that, okay? Here's an example about me. Norma wrote a book way before I did. And y'all know Camp DeSoto, Alabama, girls' camp? Yeah, Norma's family started Camp DeSoto, and she wrote a book on it. So the kids were little at that point, and she was writing the book, and she would be a mom all day. We'd get the kids down, we'd get the house cleaned up, and she'd start writing and write till 1:30 in the morning. And that was okay for a week or so. And then I start going, So all of a sudden, my wife is kind of gone. I was still in therapy in those days. Not that I don't still need it, but I was more like my example. I was more kind of a, do you love me, insecure, how important am I type guy, okay? So my wife is doing all this writing and everything else in her life, and my little parts, my 5-year-old's in there going like, I'm no mathematician, but I'm thinking we're at least, best case, we're third on her list, okay? And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, it's bad. I'm like, she doesn't even care, does she? And he's like, no, that's what I'm trying to tell you. And I'm like, she spends all this time on the book and not even talking. And, so I, of course, approach this by whining and complaining and pouting about it. Chicks dig that, right? Anything but like asking for what I needed in an adult way, Right. So fortunately, I was in therapy at the time, and so I'm like, okay, so I'm totally triggering. I'm not important to her. I'm not a birdie, blah, 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 blah. And of course, she and I had some work to do, and like, how can we organize the book in time for us? And those are adult needs. But mine was 2 + 2 = 10. I could feel it, and so could she. And I had some real work to do with some injuries that I had about, am I important? Do you love me? If you choose something else besides me, does that mean I'm second fiddle or third fiddle? That was me. And the more I owned that, the more I could decontaminate my marriage from that. Super important. It actually pushed me to need to grieve some of my injuries that didn't have anything to do with her. But at least now I was fighting on the right field of combat. Get it? I wasn't making this just about my wife, which it was not. I was letting this be about my own insecurity and need, okay? That's what we're trying to do here tonight, is to think about what it looks like to decontaminate your marriage from that. Now, could we work on more adult-adult closeness? Sure. But that wasn't the issue, all right? So one of the most powerful things you can do in your marriage is start listening for this category of these places where you feel this kind of intensity, okay? By the way, this obviously has application to your parenting. I just jotted this note in the notes when I was going through it because that's a woman this week who's dealing with a teenager separating, wanting space from that southern mom. And the mom's telling me, I can tell she doesn't like me. And I'm like, I'm wondering, of course she doesn't like you. She's 18. But, why is this coming up for you? In other words, it was some of her 5-year-old stuff, all right? All right, before we leave this, really quickly, the other direction. If we don't get fulfilled in the love department, we go the other direction. That's a bunch of touchy-feely stuff. Touch an emotion, that ain't the cowboy way, I'm Bond, James Bond. Me Conan, me not need. Me not feel. Me just get rageful and scare everyone in the house, Anyway, that's baggage Bond, James Bond, 007. And usually when we shut it down, becoming needy creates interesting dances, but if you shut down the connecting part of us, you start to see symptoms in other areas. A lot of people who are disconnected emotionally, that shutdown place, you get depression, you get addictions come from that, like the wazoo. Narcissism, this is field day for narcissism, okay? So with all of these, I want you thinking, how do I start to catch these and decontaminate? Let's look at another one and pick up speed here, because I think you're getting the message here. The other one, identity. Remember last time we said there's more to relationships than just closeness? There's more to relationships than just bath soaps and Adele music. There's also the issue of like separateness and individuality, and can I be me, and can I have power, and can I have freedom? Well, one of the things we need to also learn in our earlier relationships is that it's okay for me to exist, that I can say no, that I can be me, that I can be different from you. And if we have struggles there, blind spots there, we can go a couple of different directions. I'm going to breeze through these a little bit, then we'll take a break. Maybe I've always lived feeling controlled. Maybe when I was growing up, life was sort of like, if I have an opinion, parental authority wins. Children should be seen and not heard. Dad always alphas. Everybody kind of runs. Don't have an opinion. Don't make any waves, okay? So angry dad feels scary and humiliating. I don't even get to exist. I learn to kind of disappear. And then I marry you. And what's going to happen when you and I have a disagreement? Well, maybe I'm going to go scared, because it's really scary to see somebody get upset at me when I have an opinion. So you're going to push, and I'm going to keep giving, and I'm going to keep giving, and shucking and jiving to please you. And pretty soon I'm going to be at my therapist's office going, I don't even feel like I exist in this marriage anymore. One of my clients told me a while back, she said, I realized that I gave up myself to make him love me. Do you hear the identity issue there? Her identity baggage? A dude told me just not long ago, he said, I can't do anything without her getting mad at me. Now, of course, we need to deal with how judgmental and controlling she is. She gets mad a lot. But my question for him is, what is it in you that's so afraid of her anger? What is it in you that goes 5 years old and mommy's upset? A ton of us men do this, by the way. I think it's a funny thing about us men, because we're like men, right? But all our wives have to do is go like, I'm mad at you. And we're like, I didn't do anything. You know, all of a sudden we're 5 years old and mommy's mad. It's like, what? I didn't. How about some poise, guys? How about some power? How about like, really, you're mad? What's up, babe? Try that, okay? She's not that big. She's not that scary, okay? Or we can be controlling, other side, at a couple once. And this guy grew up kind of as the little prince in his home. He was mommy's little hero and always kind of adored and worshipped. And he was very grandiose and loved being grandiose and kind of pompous. So his wife would disagree with him and he would lose it. It's like, how dare you disagree with moi, okay? What he was doing was acting out a part of him that needed to be adored all the time and kind of worshipped, and she was his, minion. Now, the good news is that he was in therapy. He came to therapy. A lot of the narcissistic, controlling, grandiose, unrepentant people that we'll talk about in the morning, they won't come to therapy, okay? This guy was, and he really started to get, he's like, I really kind of like want her to like bow down and worship me, don't I? And he's like, that's not good. Why am I that fragile? And I'm like, boom. And of course, she was just all over him, when he showed that kind of power and humility. All right, next, imperfection. We all need some experiences in our development that show us that we could be fallen, and love doesn't go away. That's just part of the deal. I mean, how many of us have this problem? I mean, if it goes well, which it never does, we come out with sort of a feeling of, I can be fallen and you can be fallen, and that's kind of just the way it goes. That's part of the deal. Hashtag human race, hashtag happy marriage, whatever, okay? Otherwise, we go one of two directions, and that is, I'm going to live kind of blaming you, or you're going to live blaming me. Remember blame marriage from the last conference? This is all over your marriage, right? Blaming your spouse. I told you the number one problem in marriages is that we bring this little kid stuff. The number two problem in every marriage is that we never actually solve our problems or work out solutions to make our marriage work better, because our default mode is to spend all of our time blaming one another for whose fault it is. Well, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't have said so-and-so, so-and-so. Well, I did too say so. Or, I'm sorry, ladies, to pick on you, but the woman one is, we talked about this. Don't ever argue with her there, okay? Even if you didn't talk about this, there's no way out of that. She's got you in, it's a Gordian knot, and you need to go like, okay, I must have forgotten. Okay, there's no way out of the we talked about this. That's the trump card. That's the trump. You know that Seinfeld thing where it's like, kids, it's like, I claimed it. Oh, well, he claimed it, Wife says, well, we talked about this. Like, oh, well, then you win. It's like, nowhere to go. Anyway, so where do we learn all this shame stuff? Well, part of it is spiritual. We're all born under the law. We have a core sense, almost pre-verbal, the sense of being under condemnation. I mean, that's part of what that shame that Christ despised on the cross was, to start to destroy and undermine that. That's a sermon. But we can also be taught it. The generation that raised my generation parented primarily out of shame. If you messed up or disobeyed or whatever, it wasn't just, oh, you get consequences, you're going to lose your Legos. But we're good. The generation that raised us was like, I'm surprised at you. I thought we had raised, John, I'm just so disappointed in you. Okay, in other words, you can keep your Legos, you're just going to lose my love, We grow up with this real loaded fear of being bad. And so now my wife might want to talk to me about a way, and I hurt her, in which I hurt her, no harm, no foul. I was a jerk. She needs to speak to it. But I don't hear it as like, I'm just fallible. I'm like, 5-year-old me shows up. You said I was bad. How dare you? Criticizing me. Now, why? Why are we like that? We're saved by grace, right? Well, I'm like this because bad can get really loaded for me. It's really scary. Anybody else got that trigger? Everybody? Just think what it would do for your marriage for you to recognize that I have this little part trigger that pops up anytime you point out my flaws. Wow. Wonder why that's so scary to me, babe. I want to get curious about that. Just that would change your marriage, okay? You getting this? Your marriage is not the problem. Your software is the problem. The baggage is the problem. And I want you all to kind of have this common enemy. Last one is impulse control, emotional management. Remember that one? Fundamental to being a human and understanding humans is to realize how much the human race is run by emotion. So, did we learn to have the ability to have a feeling without doing a feeling? And our culture is terrible at this one. I mean, all of us are terrible at it. But, I mean, our culture, now what you feel is kind of the new definition of everything, right? Or think about the stock market. You know, stock market variations. Economic indicators, my hind leg. It's emotion. It's fear and greed. I'm afraid. Let's sell. I'm greedy. Let's buy. All right? At least they have the integrity to call it market sentiment. Like, yes, thank you, okay? Okay, both sides of the political climate now. It's like whether you're like a cancel culture or conspiracy theory culture, you know? Whether you were like, everybody ought to get vaxxed or nobody should get vaxxed. You know, we're driven by emotion. I mean, in 2020, we bought all the freaking toilet paper. Who does that? Who does that? Psychosocial development, our culture is about 13 years old, okay? We're in junior high, all right? And for us individually, have I developed the ability to have an emotion and look at it as an emotion, or do I do it? Okay, you're stuck in traffic. Do you have the ability to go, whoa, this is really frustrating. I'm actually feeling a little angry. I'm kind of helpless. I feel anxiety that I'm going to be late. Or do we just start cussing and cutting in front of people, right? All right? Our inner 5-year-olds are terrible at this. So guys, you're driving, you know, and your wife's like, honey, turn right up here. And we're like, I know how to drive, okay? You know, I'm not 5 years old. Yes, you are, okay? And you're like turning green and your wife is like, hey, sun's getting real low, baby. Sun's getting real low, you know. Now, what just happened? Well, what happened was you felt a feeling that was provoked by her offering help, a feeling that says she thinks you're too stupid to get to the church on time, you know, without my help. Poor little fella, you know, and you're like, my forefathers crossed the Alleghenies, you know. Now, what's happening is your 5-year-old is reacting and you're not able to manage that, okay? So, some of the reason we act like this is because we're sinners, but a lot of it is because we were literally never taught to do emotional management. 5-year-olds aren't good at impulse control. There's the Fantastic Four, guys. The basic character building blocks for relationships and life and marriage. We talked through some of the ways they can go wrong. That gets infused into your marriage. That's the number one reason that we struggle in our marriage. How these can go wrong, how we do them in the background, and I want you to have these so you can start decontaminating your marriage from that, okay? Let's take a break. Can y'all do 10 minutes? Because I want all the time I can have with y'all. I want you back in 10 minutes or so, and we'll get back at it.